Okay. Well, yeah. Well, Coach, thanks for coming on my Virginia Legends podcast. I saw you at the Old Dominion George Mason game. I had good seats, but you probably haven't seen me since we used to call you JJ about almost
Yeah,
35, 40 years ago.
yeah. And I actually just remember when you played for Robinson, you played for McKeag, right?
I played for McKeag. That's right.
Yeah,
And then I
yeah,
played
yeah.
for your boy Dan Merrifield, John JV.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, good to see you.
Because you guys came down, always used to come down to team camp, and in fact, I think Matt McKeag he probably played with you guys. He ended up coaching, right? But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
Matt McKeag was.
Yeah, Matt was probably 10 years older, younger than me. Thanks for the
Oh, okay.
compliment. Yeah, but I refereed his games. You might remember I used to referee all the AAU games there when you guys used to scout at U-Haul.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I know you're busy with recruiting right now. First of all, I just thought we'd start. How has the recruiting game changed? I mean, 35 years ago, it was a completely different world for a Division I coach. But now you have the transfer portal. You have loosened restrictions on transferring. You have social media. You have all the private schools. Has recruiting changed that much for you over the years?
It's an immense change. People would right now most readily, I think, identify with the NIL and the travel portal or the transfer portal. But gosh, back when I was an assistant, back when I was a head coach, AAU existed. It didn't exist like it does now. There were still lots of camps, and we would go and we'd attend a lot of the camps in the summer. The scouting services, there weren't many back then. Bob Gibbons was a name that and Tom Konchowski, two guys that had great scouting services, but there weren't very many of those. Now every time you turn around, I mean, people have just seen an opportunity to get paid. Anytime there's money, and there is money to be had in the in recruiting process, so whether it's scouting services or AAU guys are doing scouting services now, or they live streamed their games during COVID, and you had to pay to see the kids on the live streams. So there's so many changes. It's just really, really crazy. We had some restrictions back in the day, but nothing like we have now, where 3 days you might be on, and then you go 10 days off, and 3 days, and sometimes you don't even really know why they're doing it. But it is a very, very, very different landscape out now than it was 30 years ago. Really, it's a different landscape than it was 10 years ago. Who would have thought that something like the transfer portal would have come about, and a lot of schools would hardly be even recruiting high school kids. Who would have thought that? And now a lot of these high school kids are thinking in terms of, do they go junior college? Do they go D2 or do D3 and then use that transfer portal, after playing for a year or so and getting a little bit older to move their way up? Everybody's still, the top 100 or so, those guys are still, being recruited. The one and dones, the guys that have the pro potential. But there's a lot of guys, I think, quite honestly, that are falling through the cracks, that are good enough to be Division I players. But I can tell you what we've thought, and what many coaches at the mid-major or low major level have thought is, why do we go recruit these young kids, right, and develop them? And once they develop and are really good enough to help us, the Power Five swoop in and and grab them, and they go and they play there. To think that tampering isn't at an all-time high is absolutely naive. That's a problem. That wasn't supposed to be a part of the NIL. The NIL was to compensate players, and I'm not opposed to that, but It's not the NCAA, it's my profession, right? I mean, people are tampering like crazy, and it's in football. I mean, there's been, I guess in the ACC, some really prominent names that have been tampered with, right before that May 1st deadline.
Mhm.
And it goes on. It goes on at our level. There's an AAC program that one of our players who had been with us for 4 years, but one of our players ended up transferring to for his additional year. That an AAC program a year ago started tampering with his high school coach and his AAU coach, and ultimately, they got him. So it's I know I'm not painting a very pretty picture, but that's the reality of the situation. Recruiting has always had an ugly underside. Now it's worse, I think, than it's ever been. Now that doesn't mean a lot of the NIL stuff, at least it's kind of sort of above board now. That doesn't mean that there wasn't cheating going on and there weren't under the table payments back in the day.
Yeah. So it sounds like you spent a lot of your time on just the tactics of recruiting. The old days, you were focused on the players. Can this player play at American University or Old Dominion? But now you got to you think about the tactics. What can you do? What's our approach to the recruiting game?
Yeah, I think that's more pronounced now. That's more important now. At American, we did think. I mean, we dipped into the transfer market, and guys had to sit out, but probably more than most Patriot League schools did, because we thought we had an approach that worked. I mean, quite honestly, we'd go after kids that we really had very little expectation of signing, but there was some sort of contact, and we didn't burn those bridges, and ultimately, they came back to us. At one point, one team that I coached at American University, we had 2 former SEC players starting for us in our starting lineup. That was a different approach than anyone had ever taken in the Patriot League. Now, we look in the fall to find a handful of high school kids to target. And then after that, we filled the rest of our recruiting class with either junior college or the kids from the transfer portal, because everybody wants to be old. And you look around, and teams that have success, the Cinderella's stories of the NCAA tournament, have older players, that have been in college 2, 3, 4 years. And that seems to be the way to be successful.
Do you advise, and I know you don't like to give advice to kids that you're never going to coach, but would you advise parents to reclass kids, take prep years, all the things to get older, so when it's time to make decisions, they're as old and developed as possible?
That for certain kids, I don't think there's a one size fits all solution or answer to it. But players always have an advantage if they're older and more mature physically and emotionally. But even in that scenario that you suggest, if they prep an extra year, they reclass, they're not getting college coaching. They're not getting that same level of competition in the coaching as someone would, even at a lower level or a mid-major level. That quality of coaching is usually at a higher level than what they could get at a prep school or a junior college.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, we just started talking. I didn't even properly introduce you. Yeah, I got Jeff Jones. Jeff was at UVA when I was, actually, you graduated before I got there, but you were coaching, assistant coach there. But you were a great player, great point guard with Ross Sampson for the UVA. You followed very big shoes and followed very successfully Terry Holland as the head coach at UVA. Then you went to American University and coached there. And now you're presently a coach at Old Dominion, coaching with one of your players at UVA, Bryant Stith. Look, Coach, I wanted to go back to where you got started. Owensboro, Kentucky, I would think would be a fascinating place. It's on the Indiana border, so you're sandwiched between two great basketball states. We all know about Indiana basketball because of the movie and just because it's the Midwest and basketball. But Kentucky has a great tradition as well. I believe Kentucky is one of the few states that still only crowns one champion at the end of the year. So can we start off, tell a little bit about Kentucky high school basketball and maybe contrast it to Indiana basketball?
Well, Indiana is a more populous state with bigger cities, more bigger cities. So I think that's really the big difference. But in terms of basketball being king in Indiana and Kentucky, it's true for both places. People always used to joke that the thieves, the burglars, would come out on Friday nights and go to the small rural towns that were playing a road game that Friday night. All the games are Tuesday and Friday because everybody in town would leave and would roll along those country roads to go to wherever the game was being played, and nobody be at home back in that community. But it really was a point of unity, I guess, in a community. And was really a big deal. Not just for the high school kids, and not just for the parents. The people that played high school basketball 20, 30 years ago, were still following and knowing the history. And I'd like to think that we have some pretty good high school basketball here in the Commonwealth. Certainly there's a lot of talent, more talent than there is overall back in Kentucky. But the passion, just the love for high school basketball, it's just not the same. You're talking about packed gyms and anticipated games every single week. So it's just it takes on a bigger role in the state of Kentucky still than it does most places.
Yeah, I think in Virginia, one of the challenges for basketball being as crazy as it is in the Midwest is you have different media markets. Like in Northern Virginia, we're kind of like in the DC area. We don't have big rivalries with the teams out of Richmond and in the Norfolk, and then you have the Roanoke area, where it seems like in some states like West Virginia or Indiana, it's the goal is always to win the state championship. And here we just don't have that cohesiveness amongst the Virginia.
Well,
schools.
and there's so many different divisions.
Yeah.
You've got the public schools, the private schools. You've got 5, 6A. I don't even know what it is anymore. And it's so watered down. And in this area, in the Tidewater area, it just hurts me. I hear people talking about how the rivalries. Norcom doesn't get to play Maury anymore, or it's just all these historically great basketball schools, and the rivalries just don't exist. You mentioned Bryant Stith before. Brunswick, has always been, very competitive at that level. And Bryant, says that they just, that their region or their conference, whatever it is just so spread out now. And it's hard. And I'm sure there's valid reasons behind, what the high school league has done, money. But it really has undermined, I think, a lot of the rivalries and a lot of the history that goes with Virginia high school basketball.
Yeah, Northern Virginia, which would never win a state championship in basketball in the old days. Now our Division 6 teams, we get to avoid most of the tough teams in the Tidewater area and Hampton Roads because they're mostly Division 5. So we don't have to. We had a great undefeated team, Hayfield, up here this year, and they never played most of the great teams. But anyway, we'll get back to Kentucky. Now, your father, the first Coach Jones, Bob Jones, he was also a coach. Where did he come from, and where did he learn his basketball?
He grew up in a real small town right across the river from Cincinnati called Bellevue, Kentucky. He was a 3-sport star or something like that, but he was able to get a scholarship and went to Georgetown College in Kentucky. And he played there. And after playing, he became a baseball coach and an assistant basketball coach. And so we were there for a while, and then eventually matriculated down to Owensboro, Kentucky, in the western part of the state, where he was an assistant coach from 1967 to 1972. They won a couple national championships while he was there as an assistant. He was also the head baseball coach. When in 1973, he moved up. The previous coach, Bob Daniels, went to Marshall University, and my dad became the head coach. And I don't think he coached baseball any longer. I think he was the head coach in the AD. But they won the 1973, his first year. He was the coach of the year, and they won the NCAA Division II championship. Had a couple other good years. Ultimately ended up getting let go while I was a first year at UVA, which, anytime you get let go, it's difficult. But I think my dad rebounded nicely and then kind of settled in for the rest of his career as a high school coach.
Yeah. So what did you learn from him in terms of coaching? Are there things that you learned from your dad that you still use today?
Yeah, I think I learned the game. I learned the game from him. He always would say, as I got a little bit older, that I was always different growing up because, most kids, a lot of kids, including my younger brother, would go to one of his practices and they'd want to shoot and run around and, do whatever. And I would literally, sit there and watch practice. I don't remember that, but, I've always liked, watching basketball. I guess somewhere along the way, I picked up, a lot of stuff, from him. And again, I don't know if it's so much coaching, but I learned the game. And I certainly, during that time period, developed the love of the game. And that was the thing. I just loved playing basketball. I literally, in the summers, I would do that all day long. I would get up and we'd go play one place, and then we ride our bikes. Owensboro's a really flat town, and you could ride from one end to the other. And we were just constantly, finding basketball games. I mean, you'd start in the morning and you'd end up, playing under the lights, and that's pretty much what we did every day. And so I think I came by it honestly, just enjoyed being around it. We didn't have enough money to go on vacations or anything like that. So that's just kind of what we did.
Yeah. Well, in Owensboro, there was a great high school program there, Owensboro High School, and you went to the newer school, Apollo High School. But was that a big rivalry? And did you want to go to Owensboro because it had a better tradition?
Well, no, I didn't want to go to Owensboro because they were the rival. They were the hated rival. But Apollo was new. I was not in the first class at Apollo, but I was one of the first classes in that school. We, during my time there, we had some very good teams. We went twice to Sweet 16. There's 16 regions, and each region has one team that comes out of that region to go play in the state tournament. I ended up, I started varsity my freshman year after I'd played on the freshman team for a while, and then they had me playing the freshman team and JV team, and then I don't know, probably a third of the way through, I was called up to the varsity after the JV game, and I actually played in that game and never played anything other than varsity after that. So it was it was a lot of fun. Again, that was a big deal in Owensboro and in the state of Kentucky. So played on some good teams, had a lot of teammates that went on to play collegiately, not just Division I, but and kind of culminated my senior year at Apollo. We went 35-1. We lost our last game in the state tournament to the eventual state champion. We had a great year, and like I said, a bunch of my teammates. I think everybody on that team, and is in subsequent years, everyone on that team, I believe, got some sort. Bob Humble went to Memphis to play tight end on the football team, but he would have been a college basketball player. But D3, D2, D1, and junior college, everybody on my team actually, played at the next level. And we ended up being number 7, I think, in the country. And those ratings weren't nearly as plentiful as they are now. Yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of attention, placed nationally on high school basketball.
Right. So who was your coach at Apollo? What did you learn from him?
My coach at Apollo, I was very, very fortunate. My coach was a guy by the name of Wayne Chapman. Coach Chapman had played, been a really, really good high school player, was recruited, went to the University of Kentucky initially, but he left there and he was a starter and an All-American at Western Kentucky. Great player, played in the ABA for a little bit, but we learned so much from him. And with my dad, with Wayne Chapman, as much as I love them both, they were tough coaches. I mean, I used to joke around and say Wayne Chapman is probably the best cursor that I've ever been around. He actually he was a smoker, a chain smoker, and he would smoke in the locker room before games and at halftime. And there were times I can remember. I remember it fondly now. I didn't think so much of it back then, where he would have just taken a drag off a cigarette and he'd be in your face and the smoke would be curling up. And, it's kind of like the devil. But we would have, all of us would have run through a wall for Wayne Chapman. He was a great coach and really inspired, kids like me to just love basketball and play as hard as we absolutely could. Now his son Rex,
right,
who everybody's heard of, was it was just a little kid, who was always around, and Rex was he was literally all legs. I mean, he was like all legs, and he had a little neck, and then his head. He didn't have, but obviously he grew into that later. But he was always around playing, and so it was not really a surprise to see him become a great basketball player.
Did you score a lot in high school? Like at UVA?
No.
Because all these UVA guards, they all shot over 50% from the floor, which is, quite a feat. But all Terry Holland's guards did that. And I used to play pickup with you in the gym, and you could fill it up when you wanted to, but you didn't. So you didn't score a lot in high school?
I didn't. I played on such a good team. We had five guys. Yeah. Again, all of them ended up playing in college, yeah. And 5 guys that averaged in double figures. Teammate Steve Barker that went to Samford, and by the time he graduated from Samford, he was the all-time leading scorer there. It's a small school down in Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And so, I didn't need to. I mean, I had, a handful of high scoring games, but I think I might have averaged 10, 11 points, something like that. But my thing in high school was pretty much the same as it was in college, which was get the ball to the, to the guys that needed it. And, at the collegiate level, it was pretty obvious who those were. I mean, Jeff Lamp and Ralph Sampson needed the basketball, and everybody else, including myself, can wait. We had to let them eat first.
Yeah. Did you know Lee Raker and Jeff Lamp? I guess they're from Louisville, or is that
they're from Louisville. They played at Louisville Ballard, as well as Terry Gates was from there as well. I knew them by reputation. Mm-hmm. And their high school coach, Richard Schmidt, had gone to UVA as an assistant coach for Coach Holland. He was the guy that recruited me. Interestingly, they didn't recruit me until after we had a game in Louisville in what's called the Louisville Invitational Tournament. It's a Christmas tournament. And we won that. And during the course of that tournament, we beat Louisville Ballard, who had another really good player that at that time Virginia was trying to get, Jerry Eves. We beat them, and I kind of outplayed Eves, and the high school coach at Ballard told Schmidt, who's now at Virginia, this is the guy you need to recruit. And so, that's at that point they got in on me, and then a little bit later, North Carolina came in. So my recruiting really picked up. I was being recruited by good schools prior to the season, but once we started doing well, and then got some big name schools in there. But Lamp and Raker were a big part of why I chose UVA over North Carolina.
What did you think about Terry Holland when you first met him?
Really, really, really nice guy. I think he was a very much a contrast to Wayne Chapman. Coach Holland wasn't a very good cursor. He tried. It just didn't work for him. So his thing, he had that gentlemanly thing going on. But the thing I loved about Coach Holland, because he would always ask, and we would talk even when I was a player, about what it is that we wanted to do and everything. He was a consensus builder as a coach, and once I joined the staff, it was very, very interesting. It wasn't him saying this is what we're going to do. We'd be in there, and it'd be myself. 1 year Seth Greenberg was a graduate assistant. Tom Perrin, Jim Larinaga, Dave Odom, Craig Littlepage. So, some really good coaches, and, everybody would have their say, the youngest, the whatever. And there was a lot of discussion. I remember, because Larinaga would cause a lot of headaches. I would say, I don't know. And I'm not sure what I can say on here or not.
Oh, you can say anything.
Coach Holland used to refer to Larinaga as a shit stirrer, and said, you needed one of those, to kind of just stir things up and to spur on, conversation. Coach Holland, he listened. It wasn't just like, okay, you guys talk, and then I'm going to do what I want to do. And he would finally get to a consensus, and and then that's kind of how we would approach. But everybody's got an ego, but Terry Holland, I think, he put all of that stuff away. There was, it may have been my first year. I don't know when it was. We came down. In fact, Bryant Stith was on the team, so I was an assistant coach. So whatever year that was, and we were down at Georgia Tech, and we had the ball out of bounds under, and basically there was 1 or 2 seconds left. There was an out of bounds play that we called JJ because I had seen it in the summer. AAU teams were running it, and I kept thinking, wow, it's so simple, but it's so effective. So, rather than his ego getting in the way, he gave me the pin, and I, we practiced it before, but I was drawing it up, and John Crotty was the trigger man. He was throwing it in, and Kenny Turner was in one spot, and somebody was setting a screen, maybe Anthony Oliver. I can't remember exactly all of the players, but I do remember Bryant Stith. And I told Crotty, I said, if Bryant's not open, and before I could get, anything else out, Crotty said, screw it, or some version of that. He said, I'm throwing it to Bryant. And so we inbounded the ball. The play ran perfectly. John threw it up. Bryant laid it in. We won. So, but not many coaches would be comfortable with the success that Terry Holland had, would be comfortable allowing, some young guy that, had never really coached, had definitely not coached his own team, in that situation, draw up a play for the team to run. So, he was a great mentor. And I think, we talked about, earlier about my dad, but, I learned about the game from my dad. I think I learned about coaching from Terry Holland, from Dave Odom, from Jim Larinaga, Craig Littlepage. Those guys, they had very different approaches, very different personalities, but all had great basketball minds. And I was just very, very fortunate to, be in the office and be in meetings every single day and get lessons on coaching.
Well, I talked to Tommy Amaker on one of these podcasts, and he said that because I had said Duke was a chest-to-chest physical defensive team, and he says Duke, UVA, they would beat the crap out of us. Did you learn a physical defensive style from Terry Holland as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was, that was partly out of necessity. Coach Holland's teams up to a certain point, and then it became, more athletic. But up to a certain point, we didn't have maybe the same level of athleticism that a lot of teams in the ACC had. So we had to figure out a way to be able to defend those guys. The Frank Johnsons. I mean, Frank Johnson, he's an old timer. Old timers will remember. The young people have to.
He's my hero. I love Frank Johnson.
Frank Johnson was the best player that I ever guarded in college, for sure. He was strong. He was fast. He could shoot. He could drive. And I guarded Michael Jordan too, and that's a whole nother story. But Jordan wasn't anywhere in that vicinity when I had to guard him.
Yeah.
But I think out of necessity, and now everybody makes a big deal about the pack line defense. It's a nice little name and everything. A lot of that, Coach Holland was already doing. It didn't have a name and might not have been exactly the same, but the principles and the goals, were the same. We were able to be effective. And then obviously once Ralph joined us, that defense became even better because you had the big fella back there to defend the basket. But yes, we were a very physical team. Nobody liked to play against us. And that was intended. Yeah. That you wanted to be the team that, after you played, have people shaking their heads like, I don't want to do that one again.
Yeah. What did you think about Charlottesville when you first got there? Charlottesville is a very different town than it is now. Right now, you go to Charlottesville, it's got all the chains of the restaurants and the retail that we have here in Washington, D.C. What did you think about it coming from a small, big town like Owensboro?
Yeah, a big town like Owensboro. Owensboro is not a big town, but Charlottesville was great. It's hard for me to describe what it was like then as compared to now. It was like, it's total opposite. It wasn't nearly as sophisticated. I think the university wasn't as sophisticated back then as it is now. There didn't seem to be as much money and development and all that, but it was a nice, quiet town, college town. And then on grounds, there was plenty of social life. You didn't need Charlottesville, the city, to add to the social life. But what was there for me was plenty. We didn't need any more.
Yeah. Well, your basketball, you kind of like have two careers. You have the before Ralph and the after Ralph. And your freshman year, you have a traditional basketball team, two great players, two great scorers, Raker and of course Jeff Lamp, guys that also from Kentucky. And you guys had a great freshman season.
I guess maybe some people might think that it was a good season. I wouldn't say great, but it was a good season. It was really hard for me. I hadn't lost that many games in, probably 2 or 3 years combined. It was a frustrating year for me. And quite honestly, I seriously contemplated leaving Virginia and going to Vanderbilt. Richard Schmidt had gone there, the assistant coach who had recruited me, because basketball just didn't seem to be as important as I wanted it to be, or as it was to me. Ultimately, Ralph said he's coming, and then Jeff and Lee, and the conversation that I had basically was that, it was coming. It started with Raker and Lamp's class, and then with myself, and then with Ralph, and that basketball was, it was growing, and it was becoming not just something that you did. It became bigger than that. Yeah. I think, obviously going to the Final Four in '81 was huge for the school and certainly for the basketball program. But I think that movement, if you will, it was, well, albeit gradual, that movement with those classes kind of changed certainly the face of Virginia basketball, but maybe Virginia athletics.
Well, yeah, because you got to remember, and I'm sure you remember, before Parkhill got there, and then after him was Wally Walker and Gus Gerard, UVA was, I wouldn't say a doormat like they were in football, but they weren't a big time program. And then, I guess as you were saying, it was growing, and by the time your next year, Ralph would be there. But even your freshman year, you guys beat Temple, a top 20 team, and you beat Hawkeye Whitney and NC State. So you had some nice wins, and I think you were third in the ACC. So it wasn't a bad year.
I don't remember any of those things that you said, and I don't think of it as a bad year. But we went to the NIT. And ultimately lost to at Alabama, and Reggie King. Was that his name? Reggie King. They called him the Mule. He fouled out Raker and Gates. And so back then I was 6'4", 180. And for the last few minutes of the game, they put me on Reggie King, which was, a total mismatch. He weighed about 270, 280 pounds. Wow. I just tried to front him and get help from behind, but that's how desperate our situation was there.
Yeah. Hey, also you played with Bobby Stokes your freshman year, and then you played with Ricky Stokes. Are they very different? Are they very different players to play with?
Bobby tried to score more than Ricky. Ricky didn't shoot a jump shot for his first 2 years. I mean, he shot free throws. That's the only time you ever seen him shoot a jump shot. Ricky was a defensive disruptor, which Bobby was as well. But Ricky had that burst of speed, and Ricky and Othel and I, those guys came in and immediately made me a better player because they could do things just because of their speed and quickness that I just couldn't do. And I could still we meshed well because I could still do the same stuff, at the half court and everything that I'd always done. But they gave us another gear. Ricky would get that basketball and he'd put his head down, and he was so daggone fast, and it messed people up. Ricky was a great layup shooter, whereas Bobby was a defensive disruptor, but he was more of kind of a mid-range jump shooter. But Bobby was a good player.
Well, we talked earlier that all you guys shot over 50% from the career from the floor, which is really, the first thing it sticks out to me, if you're shooting that higher percentage, why aren't you shooting more? But all you guys shot such high percentages. Bobby, Ricky, even Othel shot over 50% from his career. You certainly did. Why is that? Because you guys were just so selective in what the shots you could take?
Well, I think in general we were good shooters to start with, but I think everybody that you mentioned took good shots. There was no 3-point line, so you didn't get rewarded for shooting further out shots. Although for me, I'd got to think that Raker and myself, we shot either way behind what the 3-point line eventually became, or layups. But I just think good players, good shooters, and took good shots, and none of us, Lamp was different, but whether you put Raker in that group or Othel or Ricky, none of us had to score. We were complementary scorers, so we didn't have to shoot that many tough shots, and there was no shot clock either. So you didn't get time winding down and have to take a difficult shot either. I think that all contributes to those shooting percentages.
Yeah. Well, one thing I didn't remember, and you were interviewed in that great ACC documentary that came out, the tournament documentary that came out, was that your second year, Ralph's first year, UVA struggled a little bit. I don't remember us having a hard time kind of blending Ralph in. So what are your memories of Ralph's first year and your sophomore year?
We had some disappointing losses. Notre Dame, was it that year? No, that was the next year. But we had some tough losses. We were still finding ourselves, and we were. This is, remember, before Ricky and Othel, so we played at one speed. If you think of a football team that is a team that runs the ball a lot, and when you get behind, you can't up the tempo. That's kind of what we were. When Ricky and Othel came the next year, we were able to play at different tempos, and we're a much better team. But that year, we were trying to figure it out. I think there was a lot of pressure. The expectations were so high, and there was a level of frustration, I think. And it wasn't until, again, we went to the NIT again that year, but it wasn't until we got into the NIT. And I can remember, guys kind of talking and saying, because people were down on us, and we were being criticized, and kind of saying, let's just play for ourselves. We love this game. Let's have fun. Let's go out there, forget about what the outside is saying. And we settled down and we started playing much, much better basketball. We beat some really good teams. We totally just destroyed Michigan. I think that was the game to go, maybe to go to New York City. But that was a dismantling of a pretty good Big Ten team. And I would say the NIT back then, right? The NCAA tournament had 48 teams. I think that's right.
I think it's right.
It definitely had less than 68. And so the NIT was much more competitive back then than, in any time after, the NCAA tournament jumped up to 64 and then ultimately 68. So, you were playing some really, really good teams, first round, second round, whatever, in the NIT back then.
Yeah, I think I talked about to Ted Jeffries about how when you guys won the NIT, it was a feeling like, well, that proves we should have been in the tournament in the first place, in the NCAA tournament. I guess it was more of an achievement back in the 70s when you won the NIT, probably.
Yeah, well, we won the NIT in 80, and then again
in 92.
Whatever, Stith 92. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And that was again, we were good enough to be in the NCAA tournament. We just hadn't won enough games. You ultimately you're judged on or you should be judged on what your record says. What you had actually accomplished. I wish, kind of in this day and age, some of the Power 5 schools would be judged on what they've accomplished rather than what people thought of them as, potentially as a team. I think that's a mistake that in this day and age is made. I think the nod goes way too often to a mediocre Power 5 team that basically is really not accomplished very much, but they've got some big names, or but back then, as much as it hurt when we didn't make the NIT, didn't make the NCAA tournament in 92, having that opportunity with that freshman class with Junior Burrow and Corey Alexander and Jason Williford, Chris Alexander, Yuri Barnes, having all those guys get that great experience, and sending Bryant and AO, Anthony Oliver, off on a winning note, that was probably, in retrospect, a better option for us as a basketball team.
Yeah. Okay. Well, your junior year, things really changed, and now you're going to play with the target on your back for the next 2 years. You guys are going to be number 1 or 2 in the nation for much of the last 2 years. And I even believe your junior year, you got all the way to the Final Four and in the third place game, which they don't even have anymore. Right. So what do you remember about your junior year?
We were good. We kept the momentum that we had in the winning the NIT, and we were rolling. I had knee surgery in the off season, and but I gotten it back in shape, and We started off strong and we stayed strong. We faltered. Notre Dame hit a last-second shot to beat us when we were ranked number one.
Was that Orlando Woolridge hit that shot?
Orlando Woolridge, and that reminds me of a story. So years later, Jeff Lamp was on the Los Angeles Lakers team, and as was Orlando Woolridge. And Jeff said that every day in practice, he thought how I guess unfair it was when he would watch Orlando Woolridge shoot, and he was such a bad shooter, and to think that Orlando Woolridge had hit that shot, he said things were just really unfair. But so they beat us, and then we lost the very next game at Wake Forest, and they had Frank Johnson. I mean, I can, as a competitor, I can remember that game because I was off. I had, some turnovers and some things. And to this day, that one, still, if I think about it, it haunts me. But those two games kind of, were the bump, but we recovered. Maryland knocked us out in the ACC tournament with Buck Williams and Albert King and Ernie Graham, Greg Manning, that group. That they were a good team, but they had to have that game, in order to get to the NCAA tournament. We had some battles to get to the Final Four. Atlanta, the Omni was good to us. We won down there. We had to figure out how to guard Dale Ellis in the first game in that region. He was killing us, and another example of Coach Holland listening to his players. I made the suggestion at one point. I said, "Coach, just let Ralph guard him." And that was a hard matchup for Ralph because Dale Ellis, but nothing else was working. And so Ralph, whatever, it worked. Ralph did a great job, and we were able to slow Dale Ellis down a little bit. And then the game that we won to go to the Final Four, we beat BYU and Danny Ainge. And Ralph was ridiculous in that game. He did some really, really amazing things. We got to the Final Four, and Al Wood is what happened to us. Yeah. Al Wood had averaged 30. He'd scored over 30 points both of the regular season games, but we had won both of those games. In the Final Four, Al got 39, and we couldn't. We drew up a box and one in a timeout because we hadn't played it all year, I don't think, but we had to try to do something. And again, Al Wood was just phenomenal. And then we had to play, and I said had to play because we didn't want to play the consolation game. That ended up being the very last one. That was the day of obviously the championship game. That was also the day that Ronald Reagan was shot. And there was talk about not playing the championship game. And we were like, well, play the championship game, just don't play our game. It doesn't matter. But ultimately we were told to play. So we did. Played LSU. And Jeff Lamp was phenomenal in that game. And we won that game. So we won the last consolation game. I don't know if that's something that we should be proud of or not, but it is an interesting trivia point. That was also, it's funny as we talk about these old things that I remember. LSU had a player by the name of Sam Cooke. At that time, he looked like he was, 30, 40. He looked like an older man, and he was big and strong. And at one point something happened, and he said something to me. He said, you do that again, I'm going to kill you or something. And I believed him. That was the only time I could ever remember being afraid on a basketball court for my physical well-being. Yeah. But it's funny what you remember.
Well, he was much older. You could have gotten killed. So
he was much bigger.
Yeah, it's bigger. So what about your senior year? You end on an incredible note. I remember when you guys went out, you went 9 for 9 from the floor. Probably one of your best games of your college career. But again, you guys had another great record. I think you were top 5 almost the whole year. So what are your recollections?
That last game at UAB, Othel couldn't play. Othel was hurt. and Robinson, I can't remember his first name, he was a big scorer for UAB. They played three guards and they just shot the ball really well. They did a great job of shutting down Ralph. That's probably why I had, 9 shots or whatever's, because they were probably packing it in, or, but just the disappointment, the fact that it hit me that was the last college game I was going to play. And I loved playing, there was no question, and I wanted it to last forever. But that was a tough one to end the season. But and I'm not sure very many people would agree with me on this, but I've thought that might have been the best team that I actually played on. The chemistry on that team was unbelievable. Othel turned into an all-conference guard. He had an amazing, he was first team all-league. He had an amazing year. Ricky had matured and was that disruptor. Obviously Ralph, and that was, in a lot of ways, I think that was probably Ralph's best year. He was, and it was scary, and especially when he was focused and motivated, there was nobody better. And there was nobody, quite honestly, there was nobody close at that time in college. So we had some great wins, and we learned a lot. I mean, that was a young team. We lost Gates, we lost Lewis Lattimore, we lost Raker and Lamp. And we lost some really productive, good players. But I think once we kind of got things going, we were able to play different tempos. We were able to play faster. Othel, like I said, just really elevated his game. And that was fun for me also, as kind of being the elder statesman of that team. We had some fun with that group.
Yeah. Well, how about your journey as an assistant coach to being the head coach at UVA? When you look at what your assistants do today, I imagine it was very different being an assistant coach back in around 1982, 83. So do you have a lot of recollections of those days?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've got recollections of being in the office and being parts of conversations and arguments and debates. And, that again, I think, helped certainly, shape me as a coach. I just learned so much. First I had gone, I was drafted by Indiana, played with them in this LA Summer League, but they had 13 no-cut contracts, so there was no space. So they cut me, and Golden State picked me up, and I actually made the roster. And then I hurt my ankle, and then took me a while to come back, and they signed a guy by the name of Michael Ray Richardson, who was a perennial all-star, who had some problems off the court, but he was trying to hang on and beat his demons. So I was rooting for him, but I wasn't crazy about him taking my spot.
Yeah, exactly.
I was really fortunate and appreciative that Coach Holland saved me a spot on the coaching staff. And I came back, and right about Christmas, I was there in the Capitol Center. I think it was the Cap Center when we beat Georgetown.
Yeah.
We beat Georgetown, and I was because I had just gotten back prior to that. So the team left right after that and flew to Japan and played in Japan, and then on the way back, is when they went to Hawaii and were beaten by Chaminade. I wasn't on that trip because of the plane tickets and everything had already been done. So after the Georgetown game, I was just driving back to Charlottesville. I was with my friend Adam Scheinman, and we were driving through one of the worst snowstorms that I can ever remember. Certainly the worst one that I've ever driven. 2 hours, right? It took us about 5 hours to get from the Cap Center to back to Charlottesville. That's what I remember after that game. I didn't listen to the game against Chaminade. I mean, that was in Hawaii, and it was late, and so I fell asleep. And somebody, told me the next day. And I was like, oh man, to this day, I needle Rick Carlisle, and say that would have never happened, because he took my place, right? I mean, I graduated, he had been sitting out, and he stepped in, and I tell him, that never would have happened if I was playing Rick. I just want you to know.
Yeah.
He doesn't appreciate that very much.
There was two events like that. There was when Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas and when UVA lost to Chaminade. I was at UVA during both those events. I remember waking up the next morning, we heard the news. We didn't believe either one. Yeah. So anyway, you end up getting the job at UVA, and that must have been in some ways a challenge at first, because your coaching guys, yes, you had some not big personalities, but you had some really good players that knew you as an assistant coach. You had Kenny Turner, a guy I liked a lot, and great players, Bryant Stith and John Crotty. Was it tough being a young head coach to coach guys like that? With there's, I guess Ted Jeffries says there was a little bit of a rivalry. Who's going to be the one to be the go-to guy on that team?
No, it wasn't tough, and kind of to take aside, kind of the interesting thing, because obviously I wasn't the first choice
Is that right?
to be the head coach.
Yeah.
They actually had offered the job to Rick Barnes, and we were all in the office, and he came down, and Jim Copeland was the AD, and Rick Barnes came down, and they offered him the job. He said yes. He flew back to Providence, and at which point I was, we were told, yeah, he took the job. So I just kind of left. I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. He wasn't going to bring anybody back, blah, blah, blah. So I go to an AAU practice in Richmond. I went to watch Tony Squire's team play, the AAU. And when I walked in, and this is all, you got to remember, this is all before cell phones and stuff like that, right? So I walk into practice, and Dick Tarrant, the great coach at Richmond, said, "It's crazy stuff, huh?" And I was like, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. Barnes accepted the job. And he said, no. He said, you haven't heard? And I said, no, I was driving from Charlottesville. He said, Barnes called back and said he wasn't taking the job. Wow. And I was like, oh, man. So I left, and I went back to my house. And at that time, I lived in Goochland, so like halfway between Charlottesville and Richmond. I got back. If you remember the old voicemail, the message machines, mine was filled with messages, everybody trying to get a hold of me. So long story short, I ended up getting hired within the next week. I did another interview with Jim Copeland. I walk into the basketball banquet, the end of the year basketball banquet we were going to have. Nobody knew what was going on. And Jim Copeland, just as I was walking in, walked beside me and just says very low, he said, "You still want the job?" I look at, yeah, you crazy? He said, "Well, congratulations, but the thing is, you can't tell anybody." So I had to sit through that whole thing, that whole banquet, knowing that I was going to be the next coach. Wow. Which was, for me, I was 29 years old. Virginia was my school, and to have that opportunity, that was really, really cool. So in terms of, once we got started, we had a great recruiting year, but those guys weren't coming until the next year. The team I had coming back really intact. It was John Crotty, Anthony Oliver, Bryant Stith, Ted Jeffries, and Kenny Turner, with Matt Blunden coming off the bench. Mm-hmm. And my thinking was, and I had always had very, very similar coaching philosophy to Coach Holland. I mean, I learned under him, I played under him, so with that team, I didn't change much. The offense was the same. It was about just getting them to play at their potential. And again, we got off to an unbelievable start. I think we were 11-1, something like that at one point. And then Anthony Oliver broke his hand. And he was out. Cornell Parker, a freshman that I had recruited, to come in, replaced him. And, Cornell was a great player, but the chemistry is off. And so we struggled a little bit, coming down the stretch. But then Anthony came back, and we finished up, and we went to the NCAA tournament. but that was it wasn't hard to coach those guys. And as you said, there were older guys. I had great relationships with all of those guys, and potentially it could have been a little bit different, because now, as an assistant coach, you're not their friend, but you're also not the main authority figure. And so by shifting over a seat, that relationship changed a little bit. I would give credit to them respecting the change more so than anything that I did to adjust. And those guys, they were mature, they were focused on basketball. There weren't a lot of egos, but you did bring up, Crotty was an all-conference guard, and he was a score first point guard, and Bryant Stith was an all-conference forward, and he really was the go-to guy. And there were a couple times, there was a game against NC State, there was a game against Notre Dame that I had to basically tell Crotty, all right, get the ball to him, get the ball to him. But there wasn't much of that, and I'm sure that's what TJ was referencing. But to tell a player twice during the course of the year, and in that Notre Dame game, that's the one where Stith scored. So Digger Phelps was the coach. We're at Notre Dame on national TV. Stith scores 19 straight points and our last 21 straight points. So I think Crotty got the message.
Exactly.
Get him the ball.
Yeah. Well, Stith was we talked about this earlier, AA Brunswick. He was a 6'5" post player in high school. I saw him play a lot, refereed his games. I had no idea he was going to be such a great player with such a long NBA career. Did his future success surprise you? How far Bryant went?
Well, the NBA part didn't. I think if you had asked me, when he was a freshman, would I predict all of that? I probably wouldn't have said that. But he still is. He's so focused. He works his butt off. No matter what we have golf outings that we go to here, and I don't play, but Bryant learned the game in the NBA. He said that's other than play basketball, that's what they did the most. Yeah. But seeing him just working on his swing when he's at the driving range brought me back to watching him work on his shot. Very technical, very focused, methodical. And he's nowhere near as good a golfer as he is a basketball player, or was.
It'd be hard.
But it's his approach to everything. So I think, his competitive nature, his athletic gifts, because, he was a skinny kid when he first came, but he got in the weight room and he just kept getting stronger and faster and jumped higher, combined with everything. He made one 3-point. He always says this to our players, 1 3-point shot his freshman year, his first year. But then he ended up being, a very good 3-point shooter throughout his career. And then even better, as the NBA career advanced. But, that he just was adding things to his game. He was constantly learning, constantly working. And that was it was great to see. It was a great experience to coach him and see what happens when, you as a coach are doing your thing, and when the player is engaged and committed as much as Bryant, and see, what great things can be accomplished.
So since we're talking about Bryant Stith, why don't we jump ahead a little bit? He was a very successful high school basketball coach, and I love when these great players go back to their high school and they have success. And he led Brunswick to at least a couple state championships. I forgot now. And now he's been your assistant for the last 7-8 years. What is he like as an assistant coach? And what is a big difference between being a successful high school coach and a college assistant coach?
Wow. So number one, he's great. Now, you said you love when you see these pros go back to their high school.
I didn't say pros. I mean, like great players go back. Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't happen very much.
Yeah.
The NBA guys, the guys that are great players, they so often they can't humble themselves the way Bryant Stith did. Bryant Stith went back and he was a high school coach. I've had a lot of guys ask me, could they be an assistant, at the collegiate level that have no coaching experience at all. And coaching is not just basketball. Coaching encompasses a lot more, and there's a lot that the NBA guys have to learn. And the NBA guys are the great players. So many of them they're just not used to grinding. Going to an AAU event and being there at 8 a.m. and keeping your butt there when everybody else seemingly is leaving, and until 10 o'clock or 10:30, when you've got to leave the arena, that's part of the job. And that's just not in the DNA of very many of these great players. Fortunately for me, it was for Bryant Stith. And he learned when he was coaching in high school, had success. And as I tell recruits and recruits' parents now, when I was trying to put together a staff here at Old Dominion, I wasn't looking necessarily for the best recruiter, right? I mean, we want to be able to recruit. That's obviously an important part. I wanted somebody who was a teacher, literally. I wanted somebody who could and would mentor young men, and especially given the population, African-American young men. And Bryant Stith, and by the way, John Richardson, one of my other coaches, both fit that bill. John Richardson was a very successful high school coach at Woodside High School in this area. Mm-hmm. And Brian obviously was very successful at Brunswick. And so, I saw that, I brought him in, and I just can't tell you how, proud I was of Bryant and seeing how he approached it. He didn't act like he had all the answers because he was a great player. In fact, it was the opposite. He was humble, and he was hungry, and just had this thirst, I think, to learn everything that he could. And that continues even today. I mean, he takes part in some of these conferences and seminars and things because he always wants to be better. And that's where I can see Bryant Stith, the player, now is Bryant Stith, the coach, because the competitiveness to be the best is still there.
Tenacity is how I would best describe Brian. I mean, he just really goes for it. Well, Coach, also talk a little bit about your experience at American, a smallish, mid-major program, but amongst monsters in the DC area with a lot of talent with which you can recruit, and also coaching at the beach. I mean, Old Dominion. I mean, I love Hampton Roads. It's a great area. At Old Dominion, you have a lot of fan support. Great. The men's and women's program have great, proud traditions. Why don't you maybe compare those experiences and things you like about both?
Very different. They're night and day, except that I have enjoyed both, both opportunities. At American, it was just great to get the opportunity. I'll forever be grateful to get the opportunity to get back into coaching as a head coach. The first year we went in there, things were a mess, not to be critical of anybody, but we had to to overhaul that entire program. It was about the culture of the athletic department, the culture of the school. There was no real thought or commitment. People talked about wanting to win, but they had no idea what it took to win. That first year was hard. I think we were 7-20 something. And the last game we played, we actually beat JMU. The last game we weren't allowed to play. The CAA didn't allow us to play because we were switching conferences. And I was so happy the season was over. I didn't want to play anymore. I didn't want to coach anymore. I brought in a whole bunch of guys. I forget what it was, 7, 8, 9 new guys that next year. And we had the largest turnaround in the country going from my first year to the second year. We were slowly able to change that culture. My wife and I, we loved DC. We looked at American as an opportunity to be successful. We thought, with the resources that we had, and it wasn't anything near what, the resources at UVA, but you make do with what you've got, and you're competing against a different group. We learned to recruit populations that maybe others weren't. And so we recruited overseas. One year we had I forget what the number was. We had so many foreign guys on the team. We referred to ourselves jokingly as NATO. You might have somebody over here from Africa speaking French. You'd have 3 Lithuanians, speaking their language, and it just kind of it was a neat environment. It was fun to be back coaching, and it was fun to have the success that we had. We prided ourselves on being consistently one of the best, programs and teams in the league. Although it took us 7 years to win our first Patriot League title, and we won back-to-back. We won in 08 and 09, and great experience, great for the school, because the school had never been. So that was a lot of fun. When this opportunity came up, I was surprised because I hadn't been thinking about moving. I was comfortable and happy, and could have stayed at American for the rest of my career. But it made me think, do I want one more shot at having a different challenge? And that's exactly what this is. I mean, this is a great place, but it's a different challenge. Our facilities here, as I look around at Old Dominion, are phenomenal. Okay. As you mentioned, the support, is fantastic. Now, with that comes pressure because the expectations, aren't always. I mean, you know how it is in athletics. Sometimes the expectations can be overly large, and so that adds some pressure. But it's been good. We've had a lot of success here. Last year was a hard one. It was for a lot of different reasons, and we were 13-19. So we're I think really motivated to turn things around. And in this transfer portal, we're still recruiting now. We've got 2 more spots. We've filled 5 spots already, so 7 new guys. The last time we were in a situation similar to this, though, we ended up winning the Conference USA regular season and conference title. So hopefully, in that regard, history will repeat itself. I really like the 5 we've got. I think we're real close to getting 2 more. In fact, one's on campus right now, visiting with some academic folks. But if we can add these next 2, I think we've got a chance to be very good in our new league. We're transferring from Conference USA to the Sun Belt.
Back to the Sun Belt. They were in the Sun Belt years ago, right? Oh, no.
Years and years ago, before the CAA. Yeah. Back when VCU was in the Sun Belt.
Mm-hmm.
And So so it's an exciting time. It's a tough time in college athletics, and I will tell you, I'm glad I'm on the back 9 of my coaching career because I've always liked, and Rick Carlisle, I referenced him earlier. When I was head coach at Virginia, he was an assistant at Indiana Pacers under Larry Bird. And I would go, after our season ended, I would go and spend a week or so with Rick during the playoffs. And Larry Bird let me sit in on the meetings and the practices and all that, which again was a great experience. And, I've always been appreciative of, but Rick and I would talk about kind of career stuff. And he said, I'd never want to coach college. I don't want to deal with recruiting. I don't want to deal with the alums. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. I just want to coach basketball. And I said, well, I like doing that other stuff. I love the basketball part, but it gives you a chance to do some different things. Fast forward to now, I think the stuff that college coaches have to do now, it's so taxing. I mean, it's people can't understand how much a college coach has on his or her plate. It's not just recruiting. It's not dealing with the media. It's not dealing with boosters. It goes way, way beyond that, more so than any time. This is, I think, my 41st year, if my math is right, my 41st year in coaching. Wow. Maybe 31st, 32nd as a head coach. But, it's changed a lot. And Jay Wright, Roy Williams, Mike Krzyzewski, none of those guys are going to come out and say it was because of this. Mm-hmm. But I do think, they're dinosaurs in a sense that I don't think you're going to see coaches that old. I think it takes too much of a toll physically and emotionally because of everything that you've got to deal with.
Yeah.
And yes, we are all compensated really, really well.
Mhm.
Now, not all of us are making millions of dollars a year, but we're still compensated well.
Mhm.
But no matter how much money you make, you know, if you're a competitor and you're out there and you're doing the grind that you have to do. If you can't grind, you can't coach and be successful. But it doesn't surprise me to see these guys say they're tired, they're this, they're that. I don't think it's one thing. I don't think it's the NIL. I don't think it's, it's the transfer portal. I think it's just the compilation of everything that coaches now. And then when you add in just the bright lights and social media just puts a spotlight on everything that you do, everything that your team does, everything that your players do. I think those guys are, they're the last of a dying, I don't mean physically dying, but breed, because I think coaching careers are probably looking to be, shorter and not as lengthy as what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting because the coaches I've talked to both high school and college, the game has just gotten much tougher. And as you said, obviously you make good money, but it's, the coaching 40 years ago was completely different than it is now. And it makes you wonder whether a Terry Holland would have even wanted to do this or at least for long. So, but anyway, Coach, I know I went way over. I really appreciate your time. I mean, you've done so many amazing things. So I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me today. This is great hearing all your stories about those great games. And I watched many of them. So it's quite a treat for me to do this.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. You brought back some good memories, a couple bad ones, but mostly good memories.
Yeah. Well, again, Coach, well, thanks again. And hopefully you guys have a great season next year.
All right. Thank you, Julian. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure, Coach. Take care now.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.